This is working? Can you hear me?
Yes.
So thank you, of course, first of all, to anybody involved with the meeting and the festival for the invitation. And I was honored to be asked just yesterday to start this summit after the very interesting salutations that we had with the first speech. And of course, no one can take the place of Manfred Eicher, because the role that Manfred Eicher played in the very definition of the music we are talking about cannot be overstated. So I will take a different road, of course. And since I have to improvise something, I will follow the suggestions that came before, and will talk to you about what I see from my point of view, the panorama that I see, what we have, what we need, in my opinion, and what we should work for. First of all, a little personal introduction. I work for the Siena Jazz Foundation. Siena Jazz Foundation was the first school for jazz being established in Italy in '77, in a time when jazz was totally unacceptable for conservatories. Maestro Giorgio Gaslini, the year before, '76, held a course in Roma's conservatory, Santa Cecilia Conservatory, and it was so successful with so many students that the conservatory cancelled it the following year, because all the teachers were very unhappy that jazz had such a big audience while the gamba teacher had 2 or 3 students only. So at that time, jazz was anathema, was totally excluded from the institutions. And Siena Jazz grew out of the passion of a small group. So in that sense, a small group of musicians who wanted to learn jazz from jazz musicians. So in that sense, it's different from the experiences of conservatories in Europe that now opened, and also in Italy, of course, opened a jazz section, a jazz department, a jazz school. The Siena Jazz School was born only with the aim to experiment, we can say, how to teach jazz. And to experiment it, the solution was very obvious, but it is not the solution that everyone took. It was to invite jazz musicians to teach, because at that time there was no one who had a degree to teach jazz in Italy. So in Siena, some of the people who are here visited the school. You can find many musicians that are regularly performing in festivals like Enrico Rava, Gianluigi Trovesi, Franco D'Andrea, Claudio Fasoli, and others. And in fact, if you look at the groups that Enrico Rava played with in the past 10 years or something, you will, we know from the names that many of the young musicians that Enrico Rava introduced to the audience, to the big audience, he discovered in Siena during the workshop that we have in the summer. So Siena Jazz is a fairly important experience for the Italian jazz community, but it always had a kind of national dimension, not going outside of the borders. For many years the faculty was Italian only. Of course there are language issues, so students and teachers were not comfortable with English. This changed in the past 4 or 5 years. First we had a project that we call INGEM, International Jazz Masters, and the faculty for that course was half Italian, half international, from states, from other European countries. And the same formula will be adopted starting from next October. Because from next October, the condition of Siena Jazz will change dramatically. Siena Jazz has been accepted or acknowledged with an official decree from the Italian government as the first Italian free university for jazz, meaning that we will actually be able to give a diploma to our students at the end of the course of the studies. Until now, Siena Jazz was only prestige. It was only the fact that you could say to everybody that you went to Siena, you studied jazz there, meaning that you play with Enrico Rava and other great musicians, but there was no value, no formal value at all to the certificate that we were giving with all the signature of the musicians. There was no official value to it. But now, from October, we will start courses that will actually bring students to a degree in jazz and give a university degree. So after so many years, 30 plus, 35, Siena is now becoming an institution which is private in the sense that it is not owned by the state, but it is not for profit, of course. It's a foundation that operates in the field and with the aims of enhancing jazz culture in the country. This institution, Siena Jazz, works on 3 different levels. There are 3 different legs of the activity. One leg is, of course, the teaching, the courses. We have several levels. We have courses for young students under 14 playing their instrument for the first time, and we have master classes where musicians can come and play in small groups with established musicians like Stefano Battaglia, for example, in his trio workshop. Besides that, we organize concerts because Siena, of course, is a very historical and very beautiful city, but not very active in contemporary music, in the music of today. So we also have to organize our own jazz scene, so to speak. And finally, this is what we call research, and this is where I work the most. Italy has a national archive for sound, like many other European countries. In fact, Italy is one of the first, but it is also very inefficient, very underfunded, and having to deal with all different types of music. It's obviously not concentrating especially on jazz. In fact, it's especially concentrating on other specific Italian tradition of music, like opera recording, which makes sense, in fact. So we started an archive for jazz, an archive for magazines, recordings, official recording, live recordings, all the concerts that we organized over the years. And we received donations. So our collection is now, I should say, pretty impressive by Italian standards, even if in Europe we have much bigger collections like the Darmstadt Jazz Archive, which is a resource that I invite everybody to use if you are doing any research about jazz. And we do this work of providing students and researchers with material, copying the material, of course, if these are old articles for magazine. If these are records or recording, we cannot copy them, but people are invited to visit the place and listen to them and do whatever they have to. Take their notes or transcribe if they are so interested or inclined, or this is their thesis subject. So this is where I work. But for personal reasons, after leaving my previous gig, which was totally different, was in environmental protection, for personal reasons I didn't want to do only one job. So I'm working there part-time. The rest of the year I travel to Turkey, to Istanbul, Ankara, and Izmir, where I work more or less about the same things, teaching history of jazz and researching about local music, local traditions, Turkish classical music, Turkish and East Mediterranean, let's say, generally speaking, music. This allows me, very welcomed by me, opening of the ears, of the mind, studying another language is always useful and interesting, and entering a different sound world, a different music world from the classical music of my youth, and then jazz, and entering a field of music where all the parameters are different, but at the same time some concepts are shared with jazz, for example. It is very enlightening and gives you a different point of view. It's like I say, knowing a different language, it's always not just technically, but makes your mind more flexible and more open. You understand that there are different points of view with the world. So this helps me a lot with my jazz work, I should say. And finally, I'm especially concerned with the history and preservation of documents. So all that is attached to preservation of vinyl, and before vinyl, shellac recording, tape recording, cassette, problems with digitizing material, what is the good side of having digital copies, and which are the bad side, the degradation, the problems that you can encounter. So I'm dealing with all these different sides of archiving and preserving and making available musical recordings. So from this point of view, and for these activities, I visit jazz festivals, I visit jazz school, of course, doing my lessons about the history of jazz. And I visit other types of festivals and listen to other types of music, which is always, as I said, very helpful. I think that the introduction that we heard were already making some interesting points that I want to also discuss. The phrase that Björn used, still, this music which is still called jazz, I found it very interesting because we have this whole debate about the music. Maybe you know that recently there was this big argument, which was mostly a media event, of abandoning the name jazz and calling it Black American music, BAM, which was a useful provocation in my opinion. Very interesting debate came after that. But this is not the first time musicians criticize the usage of the word. Mingus asked his records to be published without the word jazz, calling new folk music, modern folk music. Ellington also said, we don't use that word anymore, we haven't used it for the past 40 years or something. So there is a lot of issues with this word that in Europe we perceive in a very different way from the States. The association with low life, with underground, with crime, organized. For us, jazz was a hallowed word, a place where people could meet and talk, and a place where giants of artistic expression developed, starting from Ellington and before him, with Armstrong, and then Mingus, and then Coltrane, and then all the rest of the musicians that we listened and loved to. So for us, when we use this word in a festival, it has none of the negative association that many musicians found in common usage in the American language, especially, you know, as you know, the name of the is exemplified by the name of the movie All That Jazz. It doesn't mean there's no jazz in the movie. All That Jazz means all that nonsense, all that meaningless things. So that's not a very good and pleasant association to be born with. On the other hand, this issue of the African contribution to the birth of this music cannot be avoided, should not be avoided. And I think that African American musicians are right to bring it up. We are invaded by music which has been basically copied, stolen to the African American community. My friend Greg Tate, who's a great cultural critic, besides being a very interesting musician, wrote a book called Everything But the Burden. They stole from us everything but the burden. The burden was still on the African American community. Everything else was stolen. We should not avoid this, and we should actually recognize how strong this contribution was. At the same time, we have to be firm, to be clear on the fact that, as other American musicians said, African American musicians said, this was given to the world, and you cannot steal a gift. The gift was done, and was done to the whole world to use it as the world could best. And I think that when musicians play like yesterday, like this morning, like yesterday evening, independently from their country of origin, or for their ethnicity, or from their religion, they are all paying tribute and paying homage to this big history of jazz as we know it. Why I say how we know it? Because Fiona said the students from Birmingham know a lot about history. Well, I have problems with the concept of history of jazz. I have problems with the concept of history of jazz because history is made by documents. And the more we learn about this music, the more we realize that the documents that we have are deeply distorted of what the music was. Just think about it. The technical resource, sound recording, was invented about in the 1890s. So the invention of sound recording changed dramatically musicology, because instead of trying to transcribe songs from workers or people on the farm, you could actually record them. And you would think that given such a strong wealth of music from the African American community in the USA, musicologists, ethnomusicologists would run with their new equipment to record this music in the fields, in the church, in the workplace, in the blues bars, and so forth. This never happened. We hardly have a few recordings of folk researcher going into the African American community. We have hundreds and hundreds of recordings of Native American music from the same period, from 1890 to 1920. But the jazz recording, they start only in the 20s. And they start not as documents of the publishers, and then the system where you could get your payments for your copyrights only if you were a member of the association of the composer and authors. But then, as a black person, he could not apply to be a member. So it was a comma 22 situation. You could get your money only if you are a member, but if you are a black person, you cannot apply to be a member. So of course, he died of this. This broke his heart. On top of this, he is presented to us, like many other musicians in the history of jazz, like a crazy and possessive man and difficult, impossible to deal with. Morton was mad, Mingus was mad, Miles was mad, Monk was mad. How many we are talking about? And then we realize how this condition was imposed on them and how much of it is actually media high. So we know very little about the history of this music, and what we are trying to understand in the research that many people, including my very little part, also me, we try to understand better its sources. Bjorn was talking about differences between classical music and jazz. This is very true. There is a deep difference in the way these two music are played and taught in school. At the same time, the fact that all these black musicians were commonly playing classical European music and opera, especially in New Orleans, is downplayed. If you talk with many musicians, even musicians of the earlier generation, they know very little about how much Louis Armstrong, Sidney Bechet, Jelly Roll Morton knew and quoted from operas. And just to give you a little example of how little of this history we actually know, I will tell you that Louis Armstrong, who was a great intellectual, not only a great musician, but his writing are fantastic, and his visual arts as well. If you go to his house museum in New York, you will realize the depth of his thinking. Louis Armstrong loved the intermezzo from Cavalleria Rusticana, the opera composed by Mascagni, a Tuscan composer from a city not far from my own city. He loved it so much, and he was playing it all the time. Not only that, but in his mind, while playing the tunes, he was thinking of the opera, relocating the opera in the New Orleans of his childhood. In the opera you have tough guys fighting for a woman, but not a very original story, I understand. But these toughies, he was thinking not of the Sicilian originals, but of the New Orleans times that he knew when he was a child. He was playing the music and reenacting the opera in his mind. For all his career, before a concert, he warmed up playing the intermezzo from Cavalleria Rusticana, who was his big piece de resistance when he was a soloist in Chicago in the 20s. He never recorded it. Never ever, in all his decades of career, anybody produced a recording of this opera piece by Louis Armstrong, because it was not fitting to his image. And Louis was very clear. He gave up all the control on his career, on his management, which allowed him to have a very safe financial life, success, touring all over the world. But of course, he was not overstepping the limits that were allowed to him. So, the history of jazz is very relevant to what we are discussing today. And in fact, if we go further away in time, which is one of the reasons I traveled east in order to study these things, if we go further away in time, we realize that what we call European music is in fact only the music of the elite of the past 200 years. Not much more. European music before that was very different. And despite the current cultural and political climate in European music, the basis was provided by North African music and Islamic music through Spain entering Europe. European music, the instrument, the forms, the names even came through Africa, from Africa, through the African Muslim civilization that occupied Spain for 500 years and more. So this connection with jazz, the relations with jazz, I see it only as the last link of a very long chain that goes back centuries. And this triangle, Africa, Europe, America, was operating in all the different directions before even jazz started to be popular in Europe in the 20s and 30s through the medium of recording. So the history is interesting in that if we listen to Dave Holland and John Sarman and Anwar Braham improvising together, maybe we are getting closer to medieval European music that any kind of period musician can do. We are getting close to what was played in the course of Madrid or in the course of France after the year 1000. That maybe closer than any reconstruction through classical music can bring us to. So it's relevant for the future. It's relevant for this issue of this jazz being a language. Well, we use this expression, jazz is a language, but for me, jazz is more like a meeting point. It's more like a forum. It is the form that allowed musicians from different traditions to talk together. That's why I consider, in fact, jazz the first form of world music. When world music came out, it was nothing new for us. I mean, we've been listening to Ornette Coleman, we've been listening to John Coltrane, to Don Cherry, and then through Don Cherry we started listening to the South African musicians or the Brazilian musicians. The idea of a world music was very easy to accept for us, because from Gato Barbieri to Nana Vasconcelos, world was already accepting all these contributions. And in fact, African-American musicians sort of emphasized this connection in history when they start playing especially Spanish music. Think of Miles' Sketches of Spain. Think of Olé by John Coltrane. It was at some point, like in the late 50s, early 60s, jazz musicians from the States were holding a mirror to European musicians. Look, this is what you have. We're playing it. Why should you play only our music, only our tunes, only our way of playing? This is what you have. It's so exciting that also we want to know it, to know about it and play it. So it is extremely relevant to what we actually are doing now. And this connection between the history and the future, today's music and the music of the future, is what makes historic research exciting. If historic research is, you know, when we were learning about jazz history, it was like a little bit of the beginning of the Bible. Buddy Bolden generated Freddie Keppard generated King Oliver generated Louis Armstrong, and we were learning this type of chain of names. But this is not what is the exciting part of it. The exciting part is contextualizing these musicians in their times and learning how innovative they were, how daring they were for their times. If you listen to Weatherbird today, Louis Armstrong and Airlines, and especially in the context of the mid-20s music in America, you understand how and why that duet, piano and trumpet, became an inspiration for so much of the later music from bebop and even after the bebop years. So, in fact, we do need more history. We do need more contextualized history, more deep history of this music. And in this sense, I'm more and more discovering or seeing jazz as something that just broke or destroyed some barriers that were elevated in European music about 200 years ago, among different types of music. If we study the composers from the Flemish polyphonies, they were using folk songs, even obscene songs, in fact, as basis for their holy, sacred music. The barriers that we knew, we experienced between different types of music were nowhere so high when Mozart was composing. And even the way of performing the music was totally different from what we experience today. When Mozart writes that people were actually clapping if he was playing a special embellishment, think of clapping during a Mozart concerto today. It says something about the rigidity that has been introduced in this performance of the music. And this rigidity, this totally, the total disconnection between any form of popular music, any form of innovation, any form of improvisation, was basically what jazz gave back to European music. Today, if you listen to groups playing ancient music, if you listen to groups playing Vivaldi's operas, and you listen to them, you compare them to musicians playing the same music 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you understand how jazz has changed the picture, even for musicians who openly wouldn't acknowledge such an influence. They were playing a way which wouldn't be possible before jazz made such a big revolution in European music. And bringing back what lacked, what transformed European music in something which was so dry, and then it became that combinatorial, so-called serial avant-garde that totally, even more disconnected the performer with the music that has been played. So this is something which is very important for the education, as somebody has already mentioned. The experience of Trondheim, I'm very happy that I mentioned that many times before. I'm not saying this because I'm here. I'm very happy to be here. But the experience of Trondheim was acknowledged all over Europe for its power of innovation, for its power of combination of different disciplines, different artistic disciplines, and different disciplines, engineering, electronics, etc., with musical creation. And unfortunately, this is not true for everywhere. Unfortunately, there is part of jazz education which is going in the wrong jazz performance, in jazz another specialized branch of music. And so that you can have people who are perfectly capable of, between brackets, improvising in the style of someone who was improvising 60 years ago, being from a totally different background. But this is not actual improvisation. This is stringing along of different formulas that were derived from the work of great musicians. And as you know very well, you can do that. Even with computer today, they had a computer compose a symphony in Mozart style, because they extracted all the stylistic characteristic from the music and they transformed it in another symphony. But of course, this is synthetic. This is something plastic. This is something which has nothing to do with the emotional impact of the original. And this is what, unfortunately, requires to our students, and now I'm coming to some negative things that I see, requires to our students a power of concentration on listening, which is hard to find today. I don't know what is your experience as teachers or listeners, but music in our society has changed its weight. Music is not important. Music is everywhere, at the same time, it's not as important as it used to be. And think about this, going back to vinyl records, to the experience of buying a vinyl records, of taking it out of the envelope, putting on the turntable. It's all about this. It's not about the quality of the sound. The quality of the listening experience, the preparation, the fact that you are actually doing something in order to focus on a specific experience instead of just pressing a button and having a wave of music invading your ears from anywhere and in any moment. The moment of the listening becomes more important for the experience. That's why so many young people are going back to listening to vinyl on the turntable. It's a fashion, of course, there is also that, but the feeling is different, and I know it very well. I know it from the visit on the archive when I play 78 records to them, sitting. I bring my turntable and I play these old records to them. So this is something that I think we should think about, listen. Sometimes I see young musicians, I see this in class, in the courses, they are not really listening to the musicians they are playing with. They are waiting for their turn to play their stuff, to strut their stuff, as they used to say. And they're not playing the melodies correctly, they're not playing the songs as the songs should be played. If you want to play a standard song, you have to play the song. As Rassand Roland Kirk, who was a great interpreter of the melody, said, play the melody, don't just wiggle your fingers. Before start wiggling the fingers, you have to start and play the melody with a meaning to it. So this is very important as well. The positive side is, of course, that these students have allowed to access. They are allowed to access a level of exchange that it is totally uncomparable to what we had several years ago. And these occasions like this, but I'm coming from Bremen, other friends here were also in Bremen for the Jazz Ahead. Before that there was 12 Points. And before that there were many other festivals when we can see this meeting, this inter-exchange, this communication, this enhancing of the live experience, because as has correctly been said, we are very much interconnected today, but the experience of dialogue and musical dialogue that jazz allows is unrivaled in any type, in any other type of music. So, from the perspective point, I think we should enhance this strength that we have already. And we will have to make better use of these forum communities, of these encounters, of these meetings, and a project like 12 Points. I don't know if everybody here is aware of the 12 Points Festival. If you are not, just look for it on the internet. It's a really pilot experience that should be taken as inspiration. And I see that Peter is getting nervous because I exceeding my time limit. So I want to conclude with these remarks. From my experience, now we have a huge amount of well, the talent was always there, but we have a huge possibility of bringing this talent out. Our role, as for my case historian and journalist, in other case educators and musicians, is to bring out this talent and give them the best chance to appreciate the true history of the music, to appreciate the true possibility of meeting that this music provides, and to allow them to enter into contact, to get in touch with the deep meaning of the music through meeting with musicians from different traditions and different cultures. I'm of course available to answer your questions later, even privately, if you want to talk about this experience in Siena or my, let's say, research about Oriental music, improvisation and jazz. I will be very happy to do so. Thank you very much for your attention.